The leather of the chair was cold against his back. Julian Thorne sat in the dark, the only light coming from the city that sprawled beneath his penthouse window. A universe of tiny, indifferent stars. He was a man made of stillness and silence. His empire was built on it. In his world, noise was a weakness. Emotion, a liability. On the polished mahogany desk before him lay 3 phones. One for business. One for family, what little of it remained. And one that almost never rang. The ghost phone. It was a relic, a secure line from a past he had all but buried. Untraceable. Anonymous. Reserved for ghosts. Tonight, a ghost decided to speak. The phone vibrated, a low, insistent hum against the wood. It did not ring. It was programmed never to make a sound. Leo, his lieutenant, stood by the window, a monolith in a tailored suit. He shifted his weight, the only sign of his surprise. That phone had not vibrated in 5 years. Julian did not move. He watched the screen light up. A text message. From an unknown number. His thumb, scarred and steady, swiped across the glass. The words were a jumble of panic and desperation. "Mark, please. I know you said not to text you at work, but I don't know what else to do. Slater is here again. He says if we're not out by morning he's going to throw our stuff on the street. Noah is terrified. He's hammering on the door. Please, just call me. I'm so scared." Julian read the message once. Then twice. Mark. Slater. Noah. Names that meant nothing to him. A wrong number. A digital cry for help sent into the void, and the void, by chance, was him. Leo took a step forward. "Boss?" Julian held up a single finger, silencing him. He read the message a 3rd time. His hammering on the door. He could almost hear it. The hollow thud of a fist against cheap wood. The tremor of fear in a small apartment. The sound of a child trying not to cry. Leo's voice was low, cautious. "A mistake. I'll have the number blocked." "No." The word was quiet, but it filled the cavernous room. It was an order absolute. Leo froze. This was not protocol. The rule was simple, loose ends were to be cut. A wrong number was the loosest end of all. It was a risk, a stray variable in a world built on control. But Julian was not looking at the phone as a risk. He was looking at it as something else entirely. His eyes traced the words again. The plea of a mother. The fear of a child. Something in the machinery of his chest, long dormant and rusted over, gave a painful lurch. He stared at the name of the street mentioned in a subsequent, frantic text. Orchard Avenue. He remembered another street like that. Another life. Another woman who had been scared. He had been too young then. Too weak. He had made a promise he could not keep. He looked up, his gaze meeting Leo's in the reflection of the dark window. There was a look in Julian's eyes that his lieutenant had never seen before. Not in all the years of bloodshed and business. It was not anger. It was not cold calculation. It was something that looked dangerously like memory. "Get the car," Julian said, his voice a low rasp. "We're going out." Leo's face was a mask of professional confusion. "Boss, who are we going to see?" Julian stood, the full weight of his presence settling in the room. He was not a large man, but he carried the gravity of a black hole. "A man named Slater," he said. "And someone who texted the wrong number." This was a break in every rule he had ever made. A deviation from the path he had carved in concrete and fear. For the first time in a very, very long time, Julian Thorne was about to do something that made no business sense at all. Stay with me until the end, because what happens next is not just about a rescue. It is about a debt being paid to a ghost, and a hardened man remembering what it feels like to be human. If you are enjoying this story, take a moment to like this video and hit that subscribe button so you do not miss what we have coming next. We love to know where our stories are being heard, so drop a comment and let us know where you are watching from. Now, let us get into it. Julian Thorne was a name whispered in the city's underbelly. A name that carried the weight of iron and finality. He was not a gangster in the cinematic sense. He wore no flashy jewelry, drove no ostentatious cars. His power was in his quietude, in the unnerving certainty of his gaze. He owned a logistics company that was the public face of a sprawling, illicit empire. He moved things. Money, goods, people. He did it with the bloodless efficiency of a surgeon. His code was simple and brutal. He did not tolerate disrespect. He did not abide by betrayal. And he did not, under any circumstances, involve himself in the messy, unpredictable lives of civilians. They were the scenery. The backdrop to his world, to be ignored and left untouched. Harming an innocent was not just bad form, it was bad for business. It drew the kind of attention he had spent a lifetime avoiding. This woman, this stranger with her terrified text message, was the embodiment of that rule. She was a civilian. Her problem was a landlord, a petty squabble over rent and residence. It was beneath him. It was a distraction. And yet, Orchard Avenue. The name echoed in the silent chambers of his memory. He had not thought of that name in 30 years. It was a place of peeling paint and overgrown rose bushes. A place where a girl with eyes the color of summer sky used to laugh. Her name was Elena. She was the life he had lived before this one, a life of scraped knees and stolen kisses and promises whispered under a setting sun. He had promised to protect her. Always. It was the first and most important promise he had ever broken. He had been young, barely a man, caught in the undertow of his father's dangerous world. A rival had sought leverage. They had not come for him. They had gone for her. They had used her to send a message. He arrived too late, finding only silence and the faint scent of her perfume lingering in the air like a ghost. That failure had forged him. It had burned away the boy and left the man, a man who vowed to never again be powerless. He built his fortress of wealth and fear brick by painful brick, each one a monument to his inability to save her. He had become untouchable, but the core of him, the part that had failed Elena, remained hollow. Now, this text. A woman named Clara. A boy named Noah. A bully named Slater. On a street that felt like an echo. Was it coincidence? A cruel trick of the universe? He did not believe in coincidence. He believed in patterns. And this was a pattern he recognized. The strong preying on the weak. A wolf at the door of a house he had no right to enter. Meanwhile, in a small, third-floor apartment on the real Orchard Avenue, Clara Pace was trying to be brave. Her world had shrunk to the space of her small living room, to the thin, trembling wood of her front door. On the other side was Rick Slater. Her landlord. A man whose smile never reached his cold, greedy eyes. He was not just hammering anymore. He was kicking. Clara. I know you're in there. The grace period is over. I want my money or I want you out. Her son, Noah, a small 6-year-old with wide, frightened eyes, was huddled behind the sofa. He had his hands over his ears, his small body shaking. He was trying to be quiet, just like she had told him. Be very quiet, sweetheart. Like a little mouse. She had her phone clutched in her hand, her thumb hovering over the call button for the police. But she knew it was useless. She had called before. Slater would charm them, show them paperwork, talk about tenant laws. He would paint her as the problem, the deadbeat single mother. The police would tell them it was a civil matter and leave. And then Slater would be worse. He always was. Desperation had made her text Mark. Her brother. Or, her ex-brother-in-law, to be precise. He was a decent man who worked construction and had helped her out a few times. He had given her a new number a few weeks ago, scribbled on a napkin. She must have typed it in wrong. He had not answered. No call back. Nothing. She was completely, utterly alone. Clara was not a deadbeat. She worked 2 jobs. She was a cleaner at a downtown office building in the early mornings and a waitress at a diner in the evenings. She paid her bills. But she had gotten sick. A nasty bout of pneumonia had put her out of work for 3 weeks. 3 weeks of no pay. She had burned through her meager savings just to keep food on the table. She had tried to reason with Slater. She had promised to pay him everything she owed, in installments, as soon as she got her next paycheck. He had laughed. "I'm not running a charity, sweetheart," he had sneered. "This property is about to be worth a fortune. I've got developers lined up. I can't have you and your brat holding up progress." He wanted her out. That was the truth of it. The late rent was just the excuse he needed. The kicking stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse. She held her breath. "Fine," Slater's voice snarled through the door. "Have it your way. I'll be back. And when I am, I'm not knocking." She heard his heavy footsteps retreating down the hall. Only then did she allow herself to slide down the wall, her legs giving out. Tears she had been holding back streamed down her face. Noah crept out from behind the sofa. He crawled into her lap, his small arms wrapping around her neck. "Is the monster gone, Mommy?" he whispered. She hugged him tight, burying her face in his hair, trying to absorb his innocent warmth. "Yes, baby. He's gone for now." But they both knew he would be back. She looked at her phone again. No response from the number she had texted. Just a cold, digital silence. She had sent her prayer to the wrong God, and had received no answer. She had no idea how wrong she was. An answer was coming. It was just not the one she ever could have imagined. In the back of the silent, black sedan, Julian stared out at the blur of city lights. The car was a Volt, soundproof and secure. It moved through the city like a shark through water, unnoticed until it was too late. Leo drove, his hand steady on the wheel. He did not speak. He had learned long ago that when Julian was in this state, silence was the only appropriate response. He was processing. Calculating. But Leo knew this was different. All their other outings had a clear objective, a tangible goal rooted in profit or power. This was formless. An act of charity? A whim? Julian Thorne did not do whims. Julian's mind was a storm of conflict. Every instinct, honed by decades of survival, screamed at him to turn the car around. This was a fool's errand. A sentimental journey into a past that was better left dead and buried. What could he possibly accomplish? Frighten a low-life landlord? It was a task for a common street thug, not for him. His world operated on a grand scale. He moved millions of dollars with a single phone call. He decided the fates of men who ran entire districts. This was a leaky faucet in a forgotten building. It was nothing. But the image of the text message was burned into his mind. Noah is terrified. He thought of Elena. He remembered the fear in her eyes in those final days, when she knew something was wrong. When the shadows started to gather at the edges of their happy life. A cosmic do-over, delivered to a ghost phone. The thought was absurd. Illogical. And yet, it held him. It pulled him forward. He remembered the weight of his father's ring, now on his own finger. His father had been a cruel, ambitious man, but he had lived by one strange, contradictory rule. A rule he had drilled into Julian as a boy. "You can be a monster to monsters," he used to say, his voice thick with whiskey and regret. "But you never, ever let the wolves get the lambs. It's bad for the ecosystem." For years, Julian had seen that as a metaphor for business. Don't disrupt the civilian world, because it brings the law. Don't make waves. But now, for the first time, he considered the literal meaning. Slater was a wolf. A pathetic, mangy one, but a wolf nonetheless. And this woman, Clara, and her son, they were lambs. The car turned onto a darker, quieter street. The high-rises gave way to older, three-story brick buildings. Trees lined the sidewalk, their branches skeletal against the faint pre-dawn sky. Orchard Avenue. It looked different, yet achingly the same. The air felt heavier here. Thicker with memory. Which building? Leo asked, his voice pulling Julian from his reverie. Julian glanced at the phone. The second text had included the address. Number 227. Park across the street. Leo pulled the car into the shadows beneath a large oak tree, cutting the engine. The silence returned, deeper this time. They sat for a moment, watching the building. It was worn, tired. A few lights were on in the windows, small squares of lonely yellow in the gloom. It was a building full of people like Clara. People working 2 jobs, people just trying to get by. The kind of people his world was built to ignore. "What's the plan, boss?" Leo asked. His tone was carefully neutral, but Julian could hear the underlying question. "Why are we here?" Julian's gaze was fixed on the third-floor window, the one he assumed was hers. The light was on. He imagined her in there, holding her child, waiting for the monster to return. "The plan," Julian said softly, "is to remind a man named Slater about the ecosystem." He thought about it was a dark, terrible power. For decades, it had only served him. It had only built his cage. Tonight, he would use it for something else. He would not be paying back a debt to this woman he had never met. He would be paying it back to the ghost of a girl on another street, a long, long time ago. He made his decision. The internal conflict ceased, replaced by a cold, clear purpose. He was breaking his own rules, yes. But he was upholding an older one. A more important one. "Leo," he said, his voice flat and hard. "Get me everything on Rick Slater. Financials, associates, habits. I want to know where he sleeps, what he eats, and who he owes money to. I want it in the next 10 minutes. Leo nodded, already pulling out a slim, encrypted tablet. This, he understood. This was work. Information. Leverage. And for tonight. Julian's eyes narrowed. Tonight, we wait. The text said he would be back in the morning. We'll be here to greet him. He settled back into the leather seat, his body becoming perfectly still once more. But this was a different kind of stillness. It was not the stillness of apathy. It was the stillness of a predator. The information came quickly. Leo was ruthlessly efficient. Rick Slater was exactly the kind of man Julian despised. A bottom feeder. He had inherited the building on Orchard Avenue from his parents, who had run it as a decent, affordable housing unit for decades. Slater, however, had delusions of grandeur. He was drowning in debt from bad investments and a gambling habit. He had a deal on the table with a property developer, a contingent one. He had to deliver the building completely empty by the end of the month. The deal would make him a rich man, at least for a little while. That was why he was pushing so hard. That was why he was terrorizing a single mother over a few weeks of late rent. It was not about the money she owed. It was about the money he stood to gain. He has no real connections, Leo reported, his voice a low murmur in the dark car. A few wannabe toughs he pays for muscle. No ties to any real organization. He's a bully with a deed. Julian nodded slowly. Perfect. A bully with a deed. He had dealt with men 1,000 times more dangerous than Rick Slater. Men who commanded armies. Men who could make senators disappear. Slater was an insect. But even an insect could do immense harm if left to crawl over the vulnerable. They did not have to wait long. As the sky began to bleed from black to a bruised purple, a battered pickup truck rumbled down the street and parked haphazardly in front of number 227. Rick Slater got out. He was a big man, gone to seed. A thick neck, a beer gut straining the fabric of his cheap jacket. He was not alone. Another man, lanky and nervous, got out of the passenger side. He was carrying a crowbar. "This is our cue," Julian said. He opened his door. The cool morning air felt sharp in his lungs. He adjusted the cuffs of his simple, dark coat. He was not dressed for a fight. He was dressed for a meeting. A final one. Leo moved with him, a silent shadow at his side. They crossed the street, their footsteps making no sound on the damp pavement. Slater and his crony were at the main door of the apartment building, fumbling with keys. They had not noticed the two men approaching. They were amateurs. Loud, sloppy, and arrogant. "Mr. Slater," Julian's voice cut through the morning quiet. It was not loud, but it had a quality that made both men flinch as if struck. They spun around, their eyes wide with surprise and aggression. "Who the hell are you?" Slater blustered, trying to puff out his chest. Julian stopped a few feet away from them. He did not look at Slater. He looked at the crowbar in the other man's hand. "That's a tool for demolition," Julian said calmly. "Are you planning on doing some renovations this early in the morning?" The lanky man looked from Julian to Slater, suddenly unsure of himself. The quiet confidence of the man in the dark coat was more intimidating than any overt threat. Slater stepped forward. "This is my property. Who I am and what I'm doing is none of your business. Get lost before you get hurt." Julian finally met his eyes. Slater felt a jolt, a genuine spike of fear. It was like looking into the eyes of a shark. Cold, ancient, and utterly devoid of emotion. "Your property," Julian repeated the words slowly, as if tasting them. "And the people inside? Are they your property too?" "The people inside are tenants," Slater spat. "And one of them is about to be an ex-tenant." He took a step toward the door again, trying to reclaim his bravado. "Now, I'm telling you for the last time. Piss off." Julian looked at Leo. A barely perceptible nod. What happened next was a blur of brutal efficiency. Leo moved. He was not a brawler. He was a professional. He took 2 quick steps, closing the distance to the man with the crowbar. A hand shot out, grabbing the man's wrist. A sharp twist. A sickening crack of bone. The man screamed, dropping the crowbar with a clatter. Leo did not stop. He spun the man around, using his body as a shield, and drove him face-first into the brick wall next to the door. The man slumped to the ground, unconscious. It took less than 3 seconds. Slater stared, his jaw hanging open. His bravado evaporated, replaced by raw, primal terror. He had seen bar fights. He had been in a few. This was not a fight. This was an eradication. He turned to run. Julian's hand shot out and clamped onto his shoulder. It was not a violent grab, but the strength in it was immense. It was like being held in a vice of steel. "We haven't finished our conversation," Julian said, his voice still unnervingly calm. He pulled Slater around to face him. The big man was trembling, his face pale. Who are you?" he stammered. "Are you cops?" Julian almost smiled. "No. We are not cops." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You have a tenant. A woman named Clara Pace. A boy named Noah. You have been terrorizing them." Slater's eyes widened. "How do you know?" "The how is not your concern," Julian interrupted. "Your concern is that you have broken a very important rule. You see, in this city, there is an ecosystem. There are predators, and there is prey. But there are lines. Boundaries. And you, Mr. Slater, have crossed 1 inch." He tightened his grip, and Slater winced in pain. "You do not threaten women. You do not frighten children in their own homes. It is an ugly, dishonorable thing to do. It shows a lack of character. And I," Julian's voice went cold, "have no tolerance for men who lack character." He propelled Slater toward the black sedan parked across the street. "You are going to take a ride with my associate. You are going to sign some papers. The deed to this building, for one. You will be compensated $1 for your trouble. And then, you are going to disappear." Slater struggled, a pathetic, desperate attempt at resistance. "You can't do this. This is my building. I have rights." "Your rights ended the moment you decided to use a crowbar to collect rent," Julian said, shoving him toward Leo, who opened the back door. "You will leave this city. You will not come back. You will not contact anyone who lives in this building, ever again. If I hear your name, if I see your face, if I even catch a rumor of your existence within a 100-mile radius of here, I will not send my associate. I will come myself. Do you understand me?" The threat was delivered so quietly, so matter-of-factly, that it was more terrifying than any shout. Slater, his face a mask of sweat and fear, could only nod mutely. Leo pushed him into the back of the car and got in beside him. The door closed with a solid, final thud. The car started, its engine a low purr, and pulled away from the curb, melting back into the city. Julian Thorne stood alone on the sidewalk in the growing light of dawn. The threat was neutralized. The problem was solved. Permanently. He looked up at the third-floor window. The light was still on. His part in this was over. He should leave. He should get in the car that would arrive for him in moments and return to his sterile penthouse, to his world of shadows and numbers. But he did not move. He found himself walking toward the door of the building. He had dealt with the monster. Now, he had to speak to the person he had saved. It was the last part of the equation. The part he was least prepared for. He walked up the 3 flights of stairs, his expensive shoes silent on the worn linoleum. The building was quiet, sleeping. He could smell the faint scent of old cooking and dust. It was the smell of real life. A smell he had not encountered in a very long time. He stopped in front of apartment 3B. The door looked even flimsier up close. He could see splintered wood around the lock where Slater had kicked it. He raised his hand to knock. He hesitated. What would he say? Who was he to this woman? He was a stranger. A phantom who had answered a call not meant for him. He was a man whose hands were stained with a darkness she could not possibly comprehend. He took a breath and knocked. The sound was soft, tentative. Nothing like the hammering from before. Inside, he heard a sharp intake of breath. The shuffling of feet. "Who is it?" A voice, tight with fear. He had to answer. He had to say something. "My name is Julian," he said, his voice low. "I'm a friend of Mark's. I'm here about your landlord." It was a lie, but it was the only one that made sense. The only bridge between his world and hers. There was a long silence. He heard the click of a chain being drawn, the turn of a deadbolt. The door opened a few inches, held by the chain. A woman's eye, wide and blue and exhausted, peered out at him. He saw her. Clara Pace. She was younger than he had imagined, her face pale and drawn but possessing a strength in the set of her jaw. She was wearing a faded robe, her hair hastily tied back. She looked like a soldier after a long, losing battle. She took in his appearance. The expensive coat, the quiet authority in his posture. He did not look like any friend of Mark's she had ever met. "Mark sent you?" she asked, her voice filled with disbelief. "He was unavailable," Julian said. "He asked me to check on you. I met Mr. Slater on my way in. We had a conversation." Her eyes searched his face, looking for a threat, for a trick. "A conversation?" "Yes," Julian said simply. "He won't be bothering you again." The finality in his tone was absolute. It was not a promise or a hope. It was a statement of fact. Clara stared at him, her mind struggling to process his words. No more Slater? Just like that? After months of terror, it was over. What did you do? She whispered, her knuckles white where she gripped the door. I explained to him that his business practices were unacceptable, Julian said, choosing his words carefully. He has decided to sell the building and relocate. It was the most sanitized, bloodless version of the truth he could offer. She continued to stare, her fear slowly being replaced by a profound, overwhelming confusion. A small boy, Noah, appeared at her side, peeking around her legs. He had his mother's wide eyes. Is that the man who made the monster go away? Noah asked, his voice a tiny whisper. Clara put a protective hand on her son's head. She looked back at Julian. The question was there, unspoken, in her eyes. The question every person who ever encountered him eventually asked. Who are you? She asked, her voice barely audible. Are you a good guy? The question hung in the air of the dingy hallway. A good guy? No one had asked him that in 30 years. The very concept was foreign. Good. Bad. They were childish words. He dealt in assets and liabilities, threats and advantages. He looked from her tired, hopeful face to the small boy hiding behind her. He thought of Elena. He thought of the promise he had failed to keep. What had he done this morning? He had used fear and violence to solve a problem. He had removed a man, likely permanently. In his world, that was just business. But in hers? He had slain a monster. A slow, unfamiliar feeling spread through his chest. It felt like warmth. It felt like purpose. Tonight, Julian said, his voice softer than he intended. Tonight, I got to be. It was not a yes. It was not a no. But it was the most honest answer he could give. She seemed to understand. She slowly unhooked the chain and opened the door fully. It was an act of incredible trust. Thank you, she said, and the two simple words were heavy with a relief so profound it was almost tangible. Tears welled in her eyes, not of fear this time, but of gratitude. He simply nodded. He was not a man who was comfortable with gratitude. His eyes drifted past her into the small, tidy apartment. It was sparse, but clean. There were children's drawings taped to the wall. One, in particular, caught his eye. It was a crayon drawing of a house, a sun, and two stick figures, a woman and a small boy, holding hands. It was simple. It was happy. It was everything his world was not. She saw him looking. Noah drew that. He wants a house with a garden one day. Julian looked back at her. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a simple, blank business card. On it, he had written a single phone number with a pen. The number for the ghost phone. The building has a new owner, he said. They are compassionate. The rent will not be raised. Repairs will be made. You are safe here. He held out the card. But if you or your son ever need anything at all, you call this number. She hesitated, then took the card. Her fingers brushed his. Her skin was warm. His was cold. The contact was brief, electric. I don't have any money to pay you, she said, her voice choked with emotion. I can clean, I can cook for you. You have already paid me, he said, cutting her off gently. He was not sure why he said it, but the words felt true. She had given him something. A reminder. A moment of clarity in a lifetime of shadows. Consider the debt settled. With that, he turned and walked away. He did not look back. He walked down the stairs and out into the dawn. A different black car was waiting for him, silent and anonymous. As he got in, he took one last look at the building. A fortress he had secured. A promise he had, in a way, finally kept. Clara stood in her doorway, watching him go. She looked down at the card in her hand. A single number. A lifeline. Then she looked at the drawing on her wall. A happy home. For the first time in a very long time, it felt like a possibility. 1 year later. The building at 227 Orchard Avenue was transformed. The peeling paint was gone, replaced by a warm, welcoming coat of deep blue. The broken windows were fixed, the leaky roof repaired. The once gloomy hallways were now bright and clean. It was still a place for people with modest incomes, but it was no longer a place of despair. It was a community. Clara Pace was the building manager. The new owners, a faceless holding company called Thorn Properties, had offered her the position. The salary was generous, and it came with a rent-free apartment. She had been able to quit her night job at the diner, spending her evenings with Noah, helping him with his homework. She had turned their small apartment into a real home. There were plants on the windowsill and new curtains on the windows. Noah's drawings were now framed and hung with pride. He was thriving in school, the fear gone from his eyes, replaced by the bright, curious spark of childhood. Clara never used the number on the card. She kept it tucked away in a small wooden box, along with her mother's wedding ring and Noah's first baby tooth. It was a talisman. A reminder that in her darkest hour, a guardian had appeared out of the ether, a quiet, dangerous man who had, for one night, been a good guy. She sometimes wondered about him. Who he really was. What world he belonged to. She knew, instinctively, that it was a world she was better off not knowing. But she would forever be grateful to the stranger who had answered a text not meant for him. Miles away, in a sterile penthouse overlooking the city, Julian Thorne sat at his mahogany desk. His empire continued to run with its usual ruthless efficiency. Deals were made, enemies were silenced, money was moved. To the outside world, he was the same man. Cold. Untouchable. A creature of logic and power. But something had shifted within him. On the corner of his desk, in a simple, elegant silver frame, was not a photograph of a loved one or a trophy of his success. It was a child's crayon drawing. Leo had retrieved it for him, a few weeks after that morning on Orchard Avenue. Julian had simply said the new owners might want to preserve a piece of the building's history. Leo, ever loyal, had not questioned the strange request. He had delivered the drawing, and it had sat on Julian's desk ever since. It was the drawing of the house, the sun, and the two stick figures holding hands. Sometimes, in the dead of night, when the city was a glittering tapestry below, Julian would look at it. He would not see the crude crayon lines. He would see a promise kept. He would see a small piece of light in his vast universe of darkness. It was a memento of the one time his terrible power had been used not to build his fortress, but to shield someone else's home. The ghost phone on his desk remained silent. But now, he found himself occasionally glancing at it, not with dread, but with something that felt strangely like hope. True strength is not measured by the walls we build to protect ourselves, but by the courage it takes to tear them down to protect someone else. It is not found in the roar of power, but in the quiet whisper of compassion that answers a call for help, no matter who it was intended for. For in the end, a single act of kindness, however small or out of character, can be the one thing that redeems a lifetime and proves that even in the darkest of souls, a flicker of light can not only survive, but be called upon to shine.